Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. On today's program, Libya, with Libyan rebels at the gates of Garian and Zlitan, just a few dozen kilometers from Tripoli, and with France's position apparently shifting slightly more towards dialogue with the Libyan authorities in Tripoli, more certainly than it had been in the past. I have the pleasure of receiving on today's program a coordinator for the Transitional National Council, Juma Al-Gmati, who's based in London and represents the council there. Thanks very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
First of all, we seem to be approaching something of a breakthrough. Things seem to be changing both on the ground. We'll begin with the diplomatic level, though, and move on to the field in a moment, if you will. It seems that there's been a shift of position in France. We're hearing from the foreign minister, from the defense minister here in France, that the key now is dialogue between the National Council and Tripoli. Do you believe that that is now the case? Are we looking more towards dialogue and rather less towards the definite departure of Colonel Gaddafi?
I don't think there is a strategic shift in France's position at all. I think these statements maybe are directed towards the internal public opinion more than external. However, the statement I've heard today, the most recent statement by Alain Juppé, the foreign minister, when he outlined the four-point plan, it still reflects the position that the Libyan revolution and the international community holds, which is that Gaddafi must leave power. And Alain Juppé stated in his four-point plan that there should be a ceasefire, Gaddafi must leave power, and then there should be a dialogue overseen by the National Transitional Council. Presumably this dialogue would be with people who maybe have worked for Gaddafi, but not him or his sons, and also not people who have been implicated in human rights violations, they have blood on their hand, or have been involved in corruption.
Now, we've heard also from Saif al-Islam speaking in the Algerian press this week about the fact that Tripoli is engaged directly in a dialogue with Paris about the future. What information do you have about that dialogue and about what the possibilities might be for Colonel Gaddafi's future?
And yet France today has officially denied that. Our information is that Saif al-Islam is talking about something that took place a few weeks ago when Gaddafi sent his own secretary, a man called Bashir Saleh, to Paris to meet with President Sarkozy and offered the same old idea, and that is Gaddafi is not a ruler, he's not a president. He can retire and stay in Libya as a symbol for the Libyan people, and then presumably Gaddafi's sons can be involved in a political process. This is absolutely unacceptable to anybody in Libya and to the revolution and to the National Transitional Council.
So you believe that for the time being, authorities in Tripoli believe that Colonel Gaddafi will stay? There's no talk of him being moved elsewhere for the time being?
That is the rhetoric, and that is the public position of Gaddafi and his sons and his aides, that they don't want to accept that Gaddafi should leave power. They think that he can stay in Libya as a symbol, but what they mean by that is that his sons can carry on, presumably involved in power. What we say is that Gaddafi and his sons come as one package. We don't separate them. They come as one package. They have to all leave power and leave Libya as well.
So that is the rhetoric. That is what Tripoli is saying publicly. What about behind the scenes? What maneuvers are going on around the future of Gaddafi, and where potentially might he go?
Behind the scenes, we have definite information that Gaddafi has started preparations and plans for possible destinations. We have confirmed report that one of his aides, called Dr. Mohammed Ahmed Sharif, head of the Islamic Coal Society, has recently went to Belarus and purchased a very large farm there with a big house and a horses stable, and told one of his aides that this farm is going to be for Gaddafi's family. So Belarus could be one destination. Other destinations, which I think are less likely, could be in Africa somewhere, maybe Zimbabwe, maybe Eritrea, maybe some other country in Africa.
Were he then to leave, the Transitional Council would find itself dealing with the people who are part of the regime for the time being. What would happen to Libya? Would it remain divided, or or would the Transitional National Council find its way to Tripoli and take control of the whole country? What is the plan for the time being?
No, once Gaddafi is removed from power, Tripoli will be liberated. The council will move to Tripoli. It will be enlarged, and it will oversee the transition period, starting by appointing a transitional government and then a national dialogue. The Transitional Council has said all along that it's going to be as inclusive as possible. It's not going to demolish all the institutions and sack everybody who has worked for Gaddafi. It's only going to exclude those who have blood on their hand, have violated human rights, or have been involved in corruption. Everybody else is welcome to participate in the dialogue, national dialogue, and even to take part and ensure that there is a transition, a smooth transition, especially if there are people who have experience and who have knowledge. For example, the chiefs, the police chiefs, the security chiefs, the people who run the basic services, the top civil servants, the middle and top managers. We don't want them all to disappear. We want them to report back to job and carry on working so that they ensure a smooth transition.
Well, indeed, one of the accusations that is levelled at the National Transitional Council is that it is made up largely or in great part of former members of the regime who've defected. You've bet on experience, I suppose, rather than a clean record, at the expense of some of the younger members of the 17th of February movement, the people who really got people out on the street to begin with in the protest movement against Colonel Gaddafi. That will have to be redressed, will it not?
Probably, but remember that the council, the National Transition Council, is made of few tens of people. It has got about 3 or 4 ex-ministers who have been critical of Gaddafi even when they were ministers there. But the rest are all lawyers, judges, human rights activists, writers, journalists, intellectuals, men and women. So there is a widespread specialities and backgrounds, and a majority of them have never worked for Gaddafi. But later on, once Gaddafi is removed, as I said, and there is a proper transition that has been started, then there will be much more inclusion of many other people.
You mentioned those former ministers, of course. With 3 or 4 former ministers and such heavyweights within the Transitional Council, one of the dangers you face is a sort of power struggle as you get closer and closer to power itself. Surely, very quickly, the Council is going to have to address its democratic deficit.
Yes, it will, and I think it will be transparent. It will be open to criticism and scrutiny. We will have free press, freedom of expression. We will have civil society. It has already started. It's thriving in the east of Libya now. And also remember that the council is only a transitional body. It's only going to oversee a transition of hopefully around 1 year. And then they have already undertaken that they will not run for elections. They will not stand for elections. So the main thing is to go with to ensure a smooth transition until we get to a proper constitution approved by the Libyan people, and then proper transparent elections, and then the Libyan people will have their new political system, hopefully a constitutional, national, democratic system, and will have elected the people they want them to be the government of the future Libya after Gaddafi.
What sort of time frame are we looking at? As I mentioned, the rebels on the ground are a few dozen kilometers to the south and to the east of Tripoli. Diplomatic negotiations, as we've alluded to, are going on to try and see and ensure that Colonel Gaddafi leaves power. When can we expect the National Council to take control of the whole of Libya and to become the master of Tripoli?
Well, first of all, the National Council is not engaged in any negotiations with Gaddafi. However, on the ground, the revolution fighters are making gains. From Misrata going west towards Tripoli, they are now working hard to liberate the city of Zlitan and then move on to Homs, and then gets very close to Tripoli. The fighters from the Western Mountain have liberated almost 90%, 95% of the Western Mountain. The last hurdle now is the biggest city in the mountain, which is Gharian, and that is the closest point to Tripoli, and that's about 70 kilometers away. So we are getting very close. It's difficult to predict exactly when Gaddafi will realize that his time is up and that he can no longer survive, he can no longer sustain the attacks and resist the attacks by the freedom fighters and decide to give up and leave. But we hope, I sincerely hope, that it's going to be sometime this summer.
Now, in the last week or so, we've seen the rebels stop their advance in the hope that some sort of uprising would take place in Tripoli itself and thus make the final push all the easier. That doesn't seem to have happened. Colonel Gaddafi still has a lot of support in Tripoli and around it.
He has a lot of forces in Tripoli, but not support. The majority of his forces are entrenched in Tripoli because Gaddafi believes that as long as he holds the capital Tripoli, he is still in power. That's why he invested a lot of his arms and forces and mercenaries as well inside Tripoli. We estimate somewhere around 30,000. However, Tripoli is a city of 2 million population, and there are thousands of freedom fighters as well on the revolution side who have now arms and they are ready to implode from inside. I think once Gaddafi loses control of almost everything outside Tripoli, it's going to be very hard for him to keep control of Tripoli. It's likely to implode from inside. We have confirmed reports that many on his side are planning to defect and join the revolution at that moment, and I think that will hasten a very fast fall of Gaddafi's regime.
Juma Al-Ghamati, thanks ever so much for having been our guest today on the France 24 interview. Thanks very much indeed to you for having been with us. We will be back very shortly, of course, for another France 24 interview. Do stay with us.
Thank you.